So I'm just going to kick things off. Again, wanted to welcome you in the room. Also, welcome to our folks joining us online. I'd ask you to keep an eye on the Q&A. So you've got in the app, you can ask questions if you don't want to do that like verbally in the room. You're able to post those. Again, online, we'll be keeping an eye out for those questions coming in, and we'll try and replay as many of them as we can at the appropriate moments. If you add the session to your schedule, then you'll also get a session survey, and I'd really urge you, please, to fill that out after the session. It's incredibly helpful for the presenters. It's incredibly helpful for the FIDO team as well. With that, we're going to get started. So I've got Mitch, and I've got Court, and I'm going to let them do the actual talking. Thank you. Enjoy the session.
Thank you so much. It's really awesome to see everybody here this morning, and today we're going to talk about bridging tech and the user journey. And before we introduce ourselves, although I think a lot of you already know us, I do want to set out our agenda. And so, hello everyone, good morning. I'm so happy you're here. We're happy to be here. And we're going to talk about bridging the gap between the user and technology. And we'll talk about optimizing user journeys for maximum return, and then we'll talk about driving success through cross-functional collaboration. Now for the first two, we're going to have a Q&A section after each presentation. We'll put Q&A up on the projector, and we would welcome everybody in person and online to kind of share their thoughts, ask questions, and so on. There's going to be a lot of room for that. And later, at the end of the presentation, we're also going to have an open Q&A for any questions that we can help answer that maybe are tied to what we just shared or not tied to what we just shared, but definitely preferably tied to authentication and passkeys. That would be the most preferred. And to get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Mitchell Galavan, and that is my doggy Cody. He's my husky. He's a rescue. He's my baby boy. And that's him being an idiot with a ball in the park, being a cutie pie. I love him. And I live in Colorado.
And I am Court, and I am a content designer. And I do have cats, but I didn't have a good video of all three of my menagerie attendees. So that is my dog Biscuit, being a goof at the dog park. He loves water, and it's absurd and very messy all the time. And I'm from Texas.
And as I mentioned, this is interactive, so if you do have a burning question, we are open to you raising your hand, getting a mic, or sending a message online. And so I think one thing to kind of get us started, if somebody wants to, warm us up, get moving, like if anybody wants to answer any of these questions, what industries are here, right? Who has already implemented passkeys, and what are you hoping to see in this workshop? Does anybody have any burning thoughts on any of these? Which is fine. This is like 9 a.m.
Do we have anyone in finance?
Oh.
Hey.
All right.
Do we have anyone in security? It's a bit of a loaded question. What about, let's see, what's another good industry we love to talk about security in?
Banking. Oh, we did finance.
E-commerce. Kind of same, but like shopping.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Nice.
Any kind of identity management?
What else do we have? Anyone want to shout something out? No? That's fine.
What do we miss? Educate us, tell us. Who we missing?
Just yell at us. Yeah. It's great.
And who has implemented passkeys already? Ooh, we love that. Oh my God, look at all these hands. That's insane.
Who's in the middle of it? Yeah? Yep. Who's still trying to convince people that you should? There it is.
Well, hopefully, some of the things we say today will help everybody. But we feel for y'all in the middle of it. That's tough. And I think we have some other questions that we think we would love for you to kind of mull on, kind of have in the back of your mind as you're thinking about this presentation, as we're presenting hopefully very interesting things. And as you are sort of hopefully learning new stuff, how these questions are intended to kind of help frame some of this information. So how can you apply it to these areas? What does your user get out of the change? Who are your users? Where do you think you can have impact for your business and your users? And what are your users' goals in using your product? These are all really big, broad questions, but they can help ground you in what you're trying to accomplish with passkeys and with authentication and what you're trying to bring to your users.
So one of the things that we want to talk about kind of wholly as a concept is bridging this gap. So what does that mean? Mitch, you still have the clicker, my dude.
You need the clicker?
I do. So we mentioned passkeys. We love them. Driven by their security and convenience, they're bringing their identity as the future of passwordless authentication. I doubt that anyone in this room needs me to preach to you about why that seems like a cool future, but Google is actively driving this movement and encouraging widespread acceptance. And a lot of folks are seeing really big improvements in their experiences, in their adoption, and their users successfully signing in by having them. You can see like Kayak, users signing 50% faster. We've published some similar numbers for Google, and also seeing that they are more successful, and we're also seeing numbers that they're convenient. Yep. I think there's actually even more numbers these days, but used over 1 billion times across 400 million of our accounts. They're easy to use and phishing resistant, and similar to Kayak, 50% faster than passwords. Yeah. So you're asking, what does it mean that passkeys have been used over 1 billion times across 400 million Google accounts? Mitch, you want to do it?
Yeah, sure. So what this means is that at this time, when we collected this number, there were 400 million Google accounts with passkeys. And those Google accounts, collectively together, had used passkeys to sign in 1 billion times successfully. About 2.5 times, yeah.
I actually believe that this number was collected after only...
Yes, so this is, so the question is like the time scale of this number, right? So that's only users signing in 2.5 times. That's 400 million users signing in 2.5 times. It's a really great question. So if you think about how when Google launched passkeys and now, and sort of maybe when we published this number, probably a good number of months ago, that's like a pretty tight window in terms of the timeline, I would say. I would say that 2.5 times for users who don't necessarily sign in very often, because every time you visit Google, you're not signing in. This is like when you're setting up a new device, or it's a new session in a new browser, you get a new phone, that kind of stuff, right? And so that's where we sort of start to collect this success, because if you're already signed in on your computer, and you go to Gmail, and we say, hey, we're double checking it's you, but we think it's you, we actually catalog that differently.
I believe these numbers were collected almost a year ago now, which would be roughly a little bit less than a year after launch of a brand new product. So we were pretty proud of them. I think if you catch John Grongerberg's keynote later, you'll see some updated numbers as well. There's still a long way to go. We've made progress, and you will hear about it. But there is a long way to go. And that's because there's a paradox when it comes to progress. So I mentioned this gap. A gap is when technical complexity overshadows users' needs. We know that passkeys in particular, along with a lot of authentication tech, is incredibly complex. But that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to increase security while also keeping things available for the user. And when we focus on those technical complexities and lose sight of why we're doing this, we lose the user because they just lost their journey. So that's really what our presentation is focusing on, is what that means and how we come together as a cross-functional team, not just user experience professionals, not just engineers, not just PMs. It really takes all of us to make sure that we can keep this focused and bring the value of the tech that we all work so hard to create to our users. It's about what's asked of the user, and also when and how. By understanding and respecting their context, we can design smoother, more enjoyable experiences. And that's why we've seen adoption of passkeys go quite well for us so far, because we worked really, really hard on the experience. And there's still some elements we're still working on, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's every extra step is a potential compromise between the user and the experience. And too often, we end up asking users to jump through hoops to get what they want. Sometimes we'll ask users to re-authenticate, and that takes them into a deep settings page, and then they get lost out of whatever they were doing before, which was maybe just trying to watch a video or open an email or find a credential that they lost for some other site. And what does that gap look like? It can be simply described as a disconnect between the user's goals and what you're trying to accomplish, which is to make their lives more secure and more usable as more and more critical services move online. So it can be interruptions, like saying, hey, you're about to do something sensitive. You should re-authenticate right now, twice, and on another device, just for funsies, which would be a forced detour, or an unexpected channel, like an SMS OTP. And we've tried, these people in this room, all of us have tried many, many ways to bridge the gap, and we've delivered it in a number of ways. Things like password managers. We wanted them to be more complex. We want them to be unique. So we provided managers to help users do that. Automated behaviors, like automatically copying that OTP that comes to the text message, and they can just plop it in. Magic links, just click this and you're back in. And now, passkeys, which we love because they're end-to-end encrypted. And they leverage things that users already know, like biometrics or their screen lock. So before asking a user to take an extra step, make sure their key goals are facilitated and frame them around a specific benefit. So when we launched passkeys, which again, we'll get into more later, we focused on speed and simplicity. And that worked for us based on our user base, but we also know that for, say, another company that focuses on finance, security might be what they're really looking for. And that goes into customer centricity. It's not the user's job to understand our business or security complexities. It's our job to provide clear benefits and help them get to their goals. If what they want is to sign in securely and quickly and get their business done, then that's what we're trying to deliver. So how do we shift that focus from outcomes over obstacles?
Thank you so much, Court. I really appreciate you sharing that interesting info about the gap. Very cool. So what we really want to do when we're trying to bridge that gap and we're really trying to bring sort of a great user experience to everybody, to all of our customers across the web, we want to maximize everyone's return. So the bottom line of this slide is effectively what is the benefit of asking your user to take these actions, and is that benefit clear enough? Like when you're asking them to take that action, what are they getting in return? Because like when they're signing in, there's something that you want them to sign in for. So it has to be like a really great exchange. And one thing that we really try to think about at Google and generally as UXers is authentication as a trifecta of trust building moments. And so there's some really important stuff in here. Let's see if I can get out my little zappy. All right, we got speed, ease, and security kind of all coming together to build trust. And so when it comes to speed, when things work quickly, users feel their needs are kind of, users kind of feel their needs are valued. And so you're not wasting their time. When we think about ease, it's a really simple process and you've designed with their needs in mind, right? And that's another way to build trust. You've made it easy, you've made it fast, you're not wasting their time, you're not causing problems, you're getting them from A to B really quickly, and users love that. And then also security, the fact that they feel safe, the fact that they know that they can trust your business, trust what they're doing with you, and trust that when they sign in, that all of the data and so on will be secure. This can be really helpful in building that trust. And when you're measuring success as well, so when you put in all this effort into building that trust and creating that trust, you really want to measure that really well. And some of the bottom line things, like these are very broad sort of categories to think about, and I would really take these and sort of apply them to your business and then think about how you can be more specific in ways that make sense for you. But of course, things like time spent, percentage of users who succeed, and then abandonment. So when it comes to authentication, abandonment is a really tough one because there has to be like a certain amount of people bouncing off, right? That's the point. That's why you have a front door with a lock. But you want to make sure it's not too high, and you want to make sure that it's sort of within your range of tolerance. And I think that for any one of the businesses that you focus on, you can think about ways to sort of like tighten these down. Like, so maybe once they sign in, are they completing the actions they expect? Are they providing the right information? Are they falling back into account recovery and so on? There's all these questions that you can start to ask yourself based on these, tied to what you're asking of your user and what your user expects. And here I want to talk about building a bridge into the future as well, right? Because sure, like there's all of these interesting things. What we've highlighted is this gap between the user experience and the outcome, but it really comes down to everybody's teams coming together holistically, broadly. It's not just UX or PM or Eng. It's everybody on your team coming together to bring these together. And that's what these three kind of buckets really try to emphasize. Like, it's beyond just your role. Like, it's good for you to sort of get feedback to PMs or Eng as a UXer, but it's also really great to receive that feedback and set up those constraints and understand what opportunities you might be able to find in those other spaces. And innovate and collaborate really well. These things can make a really big difference in the success of your project, short and long term. And if you always keep the user, like the user is effectively, who you're building for. They're the reason why you're kind of going to work every day, right? Because you want them to do something with your app or service. And so if you're focusing on that in your decision making, that can be really helpful. And that can sort of also inform your, it can help you stay focused on the goals of your business, the goals of your tech, and the goals, of course, of your user experience. And I'm focusing on these three pillars, like UX, PM, and Eng, but teams have other people as well that should be part of this conversation. And sort of I'm using these as a foundation for you to take away and apply to your sort of daily life or business broadly. And of course, there is a lot of really great resources that a lot of different companies have provided for you to build on when it comes to authentication. So Android has created great guidelines, Microsoft has created great guidelines, and of course we have the FIDO UX guidelines. And these all make a big difference. Even if it's just a point of reference to think about, it can really help you think about how other people have approached these things or provide a strong foundation. And to sort of like demonstrate a certain way that we have tried to apply these principles beyond what you see every day in signing in and so on. Because like I would imagine, I don't want to do a show of hands here, it feels like a victory lap, but I mean, like, I'm sure a lot of people are using Google accounts, right? And so I think that you sign in and you're using passkeys, hopefully, that's really great, but we really want to have different ways for people to create passkeys. And one of the ways we've done this is by creating a simple page, very simple page, with very lean content and very lean behaviors that we can guide users to through marketing campaigns and otherwise to create passkeys. And this is just g.co/passkeys. And so we do keep it lean, we do keep stuff above the fold, and we do have this page as a landing page because we almost always want to double check it's you on the way in, or have you sign in, so that's your re-authentication moment, and then when prompted, you'll create your passkey after you sign in. And so the idea here is that we have this landing page to create a passkey and sort of have users go straight to the settings page and automatically create it. And the idea here is simply we just have one more way to create a passkey, but there's all kinds of ways that we ask for users to create passkeys during authentication and account-related moments. Be it sign-in, be it resetting your password, be it setting up 2SV APP, which we'll touch on later. All of these are really great areas when a user is thinking about the account in some way, their account security. It can be a really helpful time to set up a passkey. And we also have this cool try it out button, which Googlers really like, and I think we get a certain amount of engagement from customers. And it's simply what it sounds like. Once you hit that, you'll get the experience of trying out a passkey just straight from settings to set the expectation of what using as passkey is like. And this can be very helpful. And we have hit our first Q&A section. Do we have any thoughts? Oh, please, yeah.
One sec.
Okay, when it comes to setup of the passkey, take us through the situation where it's a fraudster who knows the credentials.
How do you mean? So they are logging into the account and they create a passkey?
Right, and they've mined the information, they've got the credentials, they've got the keys to the front door. What do you do?
We can, for Google, this is not a net new problem. So like we have been collecting sort of recovery information for accounts for years, encouraging users to turn on two-step verification by collecting information and even setting up our super secure products. So this is like not necessarily like a net new product. And by the way, excuse me, I should have said, just to speak the question back, is what happens when a fraudster sets up a passkey during one of these authentication moments. So this is what we do enable users to do, or what we try to do, is we're very loud when a new credential is added, particularly a passkey. And so we send device notifications, so to your Android phone or to your iOS device, and we send emails. And then we also have certain things that work on the back end that tell us that this is brand new to us. And so what we will do is if we think that there might be a risk of a bad actor using a passkey, we make it super duper easy. We make it super duper easy for everyone, but in terms of our authentication policy, we make it super duper easy for users to either remove that passkey or sign in using their older systems or older authentication options. And that can really help users sort of know that something new has happened on their account. And then we also aren't locking the door on them if somebody does go in and create that passkey and maybe makes other changes.
Yeah, it's quite similar to the same issue that you might see if somebody has mined some credentials, they go ahead and hijack an account, and they try and add a recovery factor, for example. Basically, any change to our system is going to set off a number of notifications to the user that says, hey, was this you? If not, check your activity now and secure your account. So we go ahead and put that in the hands of the user. But we also, as Mitch was saying, have a number of trust signals that let us know that perhaps that's not a trustworthy session because it's abnormal in some way from how this user is usually behaving on our site. And we may add in some buffer to when we'll allow that credential to be trusted, giving the user, the legitimate user, an opportunity to intervene.
Have you thought about putting technology on those challenges, like a phone number, for example, checking ownership, or figuring out, there's also companies out there that we've talked to that are looking at the fraudsters and trying to come up with their makeup so that you can see where they're coming from and everything and go, 9 times out of 10, that's a fraudster, I'm just going to block them. Like, do you do that as well?
So we, if I understand the question is if we apply technology to our challenges to kind of recognize a fraudster session. Did I get that right?
Exactly.
Cool, awesome. So I think, yes, we do. We absolutely do that. We do also recognize that we have like a tremendous users can be in any kind of situation at any time trying to get into a Google account. So they might be on vacation and they might have lost their phone and they might really need to get into that Google account to get their plane tickets, right? So we do try to think about that, but there is absolutely sort of a measure of trust that we apply based on the factors that you described and other factors as well. So we definitely do that, and we do that for every single account all the time in real time.
I think I saw a few other hands when there were a call for question right over that way.
This room's too big.
I do have one question regarding to the user experience when you create the passkey. So, for example, if I create a passkey in Chrome on macOS, so the system will ask me to select where should I store the passkey. It's either in the Chrome profile or Google Password Manager or the iCloud keychain. So it's so confusing for a user who doesn't know technique very well. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can make this process easier for the user to understand?
Absolutely. So Court and I don't necessarily work directly on Chrome, which is where that UI sits and that behavior sits. But what we can say is that, as an ecosystem, we do care a lot about these friction moments, and I think you very correctly identified an important one. So I think that's something that we care about a lot. And while we still want to give a user a great choice, because we just rolled out Google Password Manager passkey syncing across devices, which we're very excited about, we still want to make this butter smooth for a lot of users. So I think that's something we will probably consider thinking about in the future. So I really appreciate you highlighting that.
Most of the time, I will say we try to match our user's preference, as we know from their existing user data, from what we know. How have they previously saved credentials? Can we honor that off the jump? Is there something that's going to create a smoother experience across all of their devices? Do we want to elevate that one as the primary option? But we do want to make sure that we keep a certain amount of user control and freedom, and that's why that option is living there, I would imagine. Though again, as Mitch said, that's Chrome and Android making some suggestions, but generally speaking, that is what we like to try and do.
Yeah, just one more comment. Nowadays, the landscape is even more complicated. We have so many password managers, 1Password, Bitwarden, those kind of things. So different password manager has different user experience. So it's so confusing. I'm just wondering, from the standards point of view, is that possible that we can regulate the user experience for those password manager to store the passkey?
I think that's interesting. So if I understand, the suggestion is to regulate credential managers in some way using a standards body to make sure that the experience is pretty consistent across the board. So I think that's interesting. I think that the great thing about credential managers and the great thing about sort of like passkeys broadly is that there's lots of different options. And I think generally we have things like the guidelines and we have sort of other players in the industry who can sort of like help influence one another on like a great path. But I think like leaving availability and freedom open is a really good option because somebody might figure out something amazing. Even if things are a little bit like shaky right now, like we're kind of, in my opinion, in terms of a product lifecycle, like we're just off the finish line. And so it's really hard to make deterministic, very broad sweeping statements that this is correct and this is fact. But, and so I think that the choice aspect remains really important, and then enabling people to kind of create these systems as they wish is also very important. But I do appreciate what you're saying, that yes, sometimes it is confusing.
There's also tremendous opportunity to lean in with the FIDO working groups to help bring your opinions around like these critical like product choices that can dramatically impact the user experience to the surface, and get all the experts in the room and the entire industry thinking about it together to come to maybe a decision that we like, that we think honors, as we've said throughout this presentation, the user's intention and expectation. Next question.
Hi, quick question, just as a follow-on for credential managers. How do you feel about managing some of these? Like, not all are created equal, right? Like, some are more well-known, more rigorous. Others are a little more, well, it could be from some government-controlled, and who knows what it is, and people don't realize, and they just use it. The common everyday person doesn't know the difference. What do you feel about trying to control the the credential managers that are being used? Is there a way to be doing that across all the different ecosystems?
I think so if as a group, as like an identity technology community, we decided that that was the path forward, I'm sure that there would be a path forward to sort of deciding and picking and choosing credential managers that could use passkeys. I think that we would have to decide that as a community, and I don't necessarily know if that's like the healthiest or least healthiest option to move forward. I do appreciate that there is risk, but I also think that like every major operating system should be syncing passkeys very soon, and so that's going to be like a built-in option for everybody. And so, like, if you're making a choice to move to another credential manager, like 1Password and Dashlane are like really strong options, and they offer like tremendous user value. So, like, you know, users could use those. And then if there's more risky, shaky ones, I don't know why users would be on those, but I know users do unexpected things sometimes. So I think that it's a really tough question. I think that's a question I would love to ask the community broadly. It's a question we would ask why we would do that, and of course security is like a great reason. And then how we would enact that and what we would do with that and the ultimate benefit of that, I think, is a really big question as well. So me right now, I would be completely on the fence about it. I always lean open and free, like free and open source is always my thing, but I couldn't, I don't think I could answer that right now.
I would suggest that if you are thinking about excluding some credential managers for security purposes or usability purposes, that you take a moment to perhaps explain that to your user when it seems appropriate, like perhaps in a help article or some other place where they might be looking for that information. Because again, it's like you want to meet their expectation and you want to allow them the freedom and control of their management and support it with your site. But if you truly believe and you decide as a company, we do not want to support this particular one, take a moment to figure out how to explain that to your users, just for that user awareness.
Yeah, just coming from a regulated industry like financial institutions, we don't want just let just anybody in. We'd want to be narrowing it. So just wanted to just to respond to your, I don't know who will be using it. It's just people do crazy things and fraudsters put crazy things out there that people use. So from a financial institutions, it would be something we'd be worried about. Just to explain why.
We do know that financial institutions, usually security is that message that's resonating the most when it comes to adoption, at least of like passkeys and other advanced authentication methods. And so I think it's an easily explained choice that you make to not let everything jive. And that is what your users are going to care about, as far as I know from our partners in financial services.
Hello, I'm curious what you both think about how passkeys play into the multi-user account access problem, especially like the Amazons, the eBays, the Netflixes. You know, my mom's always texting my dad for the 2FA code to log in. So how do you think the future of passkeys will play into that?
A really good question. So if I understand the question is like, how do passkeys play into a world where accounts are accessed by multiple people? Cool. So I think an interesting way to think about that would be like once you have the passkey set up on the device, then there's no more 2FA codes or anything like that coming in. The passkey is syncing and you're signing in. So if you have like good actors syncing passkeys across their devices, sharing the same account, you can create that passkey really easily, have it in the credential manager, be it like Dashlane, 1Password, something else, and that's no problem. I think it probably is interesting to think about like the initial setup. But initial setup should only be gated by the traditional authentication factors. So I don't, like, unless there's so I think that once the passkey is set up on a single device, the problem should not be a problem, I think. And setup is only gated by existing 2FA.
I think also one of the benefits of the passkey in that scenario in particular is that perhaps your family member won't have to message you every time, just that first time, to get a passkey set up on their device. And then and it's authenticated by the passkey on yours, and then they're good to go. They have their own passkey for their site, for their device, for that particular site. How we're going to manage that over time is kind of a different question, but that is one way you could do it now.
We do also talk about later in this presentation, like a healthy authentication pillar ecosystem. So like I think it's easy to kind of think about, okay, like in 5 years when we're using less things, like then what? But I think that's a then what question. You know what I mean? As Court alluded to.
You mentioned something about the Google Password Manager passkey sync across devices. Does this mean across different OS as well?
Yes.
And is this something only for Google or a standard in general for FIDO?
You can store any passkey in your Google Password Manager from any service and sync across devices.
Oh, okay.
I've got a couple. Wow. I've got a couple from online, which I'll just read through. And then, do you guys want to move on to the next section? Yeah. Okay. So what I'll also do is I'll remind everyone that there is a space outside in the hallway where you'll be able to meet with speakers afterwards. So if we don't get a time to catch your question now, feel free to grab. I'm sure that Mitch and Court will be very happy to be corralled after the talk and answer all the other questions that you have.
We also have 2 other Q&A moments in this presentation. So, I mean, keep them coming.
Yeah, but if your question was for now, you can't ask it later. You can't do that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We do have some amazing supportive Googlers in the audience who can also answer these questions. We got Harsh, Jason, some others.
Perfect. So let me just ask this one that came in online. So what is the best recovery channel for the user if the passkey doesn't work or if some other form of 2FA doesn't work?
I'm sorry, excuse me?
Yeah. I'll go slowly. What is the best recovery channel for the user if the passkey or some other form of 2FA does not work?
I think, to be honest, whatever one works. And because at that point, it's just about getting the user back into the account. I think these gaps where users are falling out of their accounts and no longer having access to passkeys, like these will close up over time as syncing ecosystems become more robust and more passkeys are made. I think that this is a temporary problem, but it's the dragon's tail problem, so it's going to be here for a while.
Got it. Cool.
I think a simple suggestion that I see and often appreciate as a user is to say, go find another device where you're already signed in, is a simple message to the user that they may comprehend, like, oh, right, I'm signed in on my laptop. It's a bit annoying, but I can get in, and they can go over there and refresh their settings in that active session.
Cool. Thank you. Mm-hmm. On to section 2.
Indeed. So let's talk about optimizing our user journeys for maximum return. A lot of folks raise their hands and said you're in the middle of implementing. Some folks are in the middle of convincing folks that you should try. And we're going to talk about how we have been approaching that. We launched with our original Google.com strategy just a couple of years ago, and it went very well. Obviously, there were some kinks, some things weren't quite there yet that we're happy to say are there now, like syncing. But how did we frame that up, and how did we evolve? So these themes we mentioned in the first section are going to be sprinkled throughout just so we kind of show how we apply this thinking to a project like Passkeys or really any new change in the auth space. We're the champions of the user. We're going to keep saying that and saying we want to honor their intentions and meet their expectations while elevating their security. So passkey creation, we were just talking about that. What's that adoption positioning that we used? Well, honoring their attention. We know that sign-in is not the destination online, but it's a stop on the journey. People don't go online and say, I really want to enter my username and my password right now because like it's a quality password. And it's just like, I'm so proud of myself for it, and I've used it 7 other places. Just kidding. But we know that we are there to make them feel secure and ultimately get them on their way to what they were trying to do. In that, we know that simplicity is far greater than technical know-how. What is that user benefit, and how do we help them understand? We found in our research that simplicity was a far bigger or larger, greater selling point than saying, hey, this is the highest level cryptography and beep boop, doodly dad security spiked fence thing made by really smart people with big brains. No, people want to say, hey, I would really like this to be simpler and also feel like I can trust it. And part of that is like we know that if users can get a good enough experience without signing in, why go through the hassle? Often signing in can be arduous. You can get locked out, and then you maybe can't even use the basic features that you were looking for, and perhaps the signed out experience is better. But we don't want that as sites. We want folks to be signed in so we can optimize their experience and ultimately keep them safe. So we make that sign in a little bit better. We know that users want convenience and easy access to their accounts. So when we launched a couple of years ago, we made it really simple. Simplify your sign in. This resonated really well with our initial group. Folks got it really quickly, and they were like, cool, what do we do with that? What does that mean? So we wanted to also let them know, by leveraging familiar language and simple explanations, what passkeys we were going to do for them. Notice that we didn't have passkeys in the header, but we did include it in the body, because we did want users to be able to have that moment of self-education, so they needed to see that word, passkeys. The industry has accepted it, there's lots of literature on it, and it takes the onus off of the websites to explain the technology if you just include that little word and a little bit of how it works. So you can now use your fingerprint, face, or screen lock to verify it's really you, and you can learn more. That way they can go and search through our links, but they also have the language. They can go look on their own for what Apple, Microsoft, PlayStation, Amazon, whatever people have launched about this technology themselves. And saying words like fingerprint, face, screen lock, we know that our users understand those terms because they've been unlocking their devices for quite some time now. That being said, I also saw some research recently that said that users really respond to the phrase encrypted, even though they don't necessarily know what it means. But it makes them feel secure. So do with that what you will. I'm playing with it in some experiments right now. But largely, familiar language, simple explanations, include the word, and highlight that user benefit. So user centricity. Deliver that value to your users, but also to your business. You're trying to convince people that this is a good idea? Well, it is, because it's simple and it's secure. It's bringing users the convenience that they deserve, with the convenience that they want, with the security that they deserve. And that will increase signed-in sessions, that will increase security overall, and that is value. So how do we optimize those journeys to drive conversion? You're up.
And so one question we find when we talk about convenience and we talk about the metrics that we track to measure convenience, we find people and users kind of asking, like, how are passkeys convenient? Like, what does that mean? What does that mean to me? And one thing we found as we did our experiments was that for Google users in particular, what convenience, or a way that convenience can manifest, is through describing the speed of passkeys. And so you can see here, we transitioned over to just saying sign in faster. And we did a bunch of experiments with lots of different variants of copy. And we even had sign in faster followed by different kinds of things like sign in faster using your biometrics, sign in faster using your screen lock, sign in faster because it's super cool. And we tried all of these different things, maybe not the last one, but we tried all of these different things. And really, those 3 words, sign in faster, really helped us boost conversion and drive it up really high. And that was, and there's another thing that tied into that, a little bit of a surprise later. But another thing we wanted to do was really think about how we signal that simplicity and speed visually, and we really do that through our illustrations. And sort of like through studies that are adjacent to passkeys or using passkeys but not directly our team, or our studies, we hear like sometimes sort of mixed feedback about our illustrations, and so that's something we have chosen to sort of double down on. Like how can we improve our illustrations and maybe animations to convey speed in a very beneficial way? And this, it helps, like these examples are, yeah? Question on illustrations. Yeah, please. So we have a whole team that really thinks about our illustrations, and there's different kinds of accessibility. What kinds of accessibility do you mean?
Like, for example, if you're trying to communicate something through the illustrations, not when you're over there,
So what we do is we are currently using a strategy of working with our visual designers to test a variety of things. And so in order to convey the right message to users around the world, we're trying to find iconography and imagery that resonates with a majority of audiences. So this actually does resonate quite well with a lot of our users because it has a lot of very familiar iconography. It's just the clutter and busyness that's making it hard for people to parse. And so we're really trying to think about how we improve that. And then when it comes to accessibility, maybe in terms of another way to interpret the word of like how people might interact with their device or other needs that they may have. Illustrations, we put what are called ARIA tags on there, and that's they describe the illustration to the users, and that can help a lot too.
I would suggest when you look at those tags and you think about writing that data to be read like through a screen reader, that you also leverage that familiar language again. Say like, see a house key and a fingerprint symbol and the passkey logo with a lock. And that would be my suggestion is, again, that familiar language so that those who are relying on a reader get the same experience.
Thank you for your question. And so I alluded earlier to kind of like a little bit of a surprise, but a surprise for us. And the reason why there's that yellow tag on the opener of this section that says, hey, this is provisional findings on a subset of platforms, was that this combination of text behind the scrim with this sort of WebAuthn pop-up, this is actually what's really been driving or helping a lot of our conversion. It's this combination of just popping up WebAuthn without asking the user to interact with the page. So we simply get them to this page and we present WebAuthn right away with that background. Really, really, really doing a great job for us in certain contexts. And so the reason why sort of like I add all those caveats is simply because I think that's been very effective for us. I think it's really hard at this stage in an ecosystem or product like Passkey's life cycle to promise that that's the most effective thing for everybody or that's the right for every user in every use case. So while it's been very successful, we did want to share, it's still got that little bit of a caveat. I don't know how far that will go. It might go the farthest, but we don't know for a fact yet. And so one area where we are continuing to put in some energy is on hybrid, and hybrid remains difficult for a lot of users for different reasons, and so we know hybrid is the QR code flow as well. And some of the things we've highlighted as sort of difficult areas to sort of manage with hybrid has been sort of like camera app compatibility, kind of Bluetooth unreliability. Like if you have two devices that really should know each other pretty well, like they should, like they've been around, like they've been in your backpack for months, they should know each other. And they still refuse to communicate, like that can happen. And then also, it's a novel experience for users, which is the biggest one. So before we rolled out Passkeys, we did a bunch of studies on what we thought, or we were trying to understand how users felt about QR codes. And broadly, especially in like our post-COVID world, like users know what a QR code is, they know to point the phone at it and scan it, and that really wasn't the problem. The problem kind of manifests in context. The problem manifests when they're introduced to this idea during sign-in and then something doesn't work or it works differently than they expect or something happens. And that can sort of like immediately make them not want to try it a second time because it's a lot of work, right? Because we see that passkeys signing in on a single device is really strong. So we know that when you're signing in and the passkey is stored locally, great performance. But when it's coming across devices, that's when things can get a little different.
Mitch, question for you from me.
Ooh.
When does hybrid pop up today? And is it still as prevalent as it once was?
No, absolutely not. So hybrid pops up. So I can speak to the Google account. Hybrid will pop up when we know that there is a passkey on a mobile device and we see you signing on a new device. And we have a big preference for using passkeys, of course. Now, we don't do it as much as we used to because of the aforementioned hiccups. However, that's really when we'll ask for it. So the bottom line is simply, we can ask for a passkey when we know there's one on account, we really think it's on a mobile device, and we think that you'll succeed.
And we also take moments to suggest after someone successfully does that they create a local one if they own that device, right?
So true.
And then maybe they don't have to do it again?
Yeah, nice one. Yep.
Of the two things that you mentioned, well, I mean, you have the QR code and you have the Bluetooth here. What would you say is the less reliable or the more problematic?
Okay, so the question is, of the QR code and the Bluetooth, which one causes users more trouble? Okay, I would say it's hard to tell, and it's simply because we're measuring them using different things. One of them is qualitative, right? So it's like user experience. The other one is quantitative, so like we're looking at the numbers. It's really hard to say. I would say the QR code itself is probably the most challenging one, and that's because it's the phone, it has to come out, a lot of stuff has to go right, and then that's, I would kind of consider them really interlinked in terms of the problems that may show. And so some of the things we've been doing to try and improve hybrid is improving our visual cues. So we've kind of run through with our great friends at Chrome to try and think about this UI and how to make it clear to what we're asking the user to do, because to make matters even better, this UI is also used for security keys in certain contexts. So we're asking a user to parse out a lot of information during the hybrid flow. And so what we've done is we've introduced iconography, we've improved the text, and we're trying to work with it, but we really love syncing passkeys. Syncing passkeys is really great. And so another thing that we can think about is, or another thing where we've made a lot of progress on is passkey management. And this was like really like a community effort, like with the FIDO UX working group. We got lots of great information from them. It was really awesome. And so when we launched passkeys to set context, what we wanted to do was highlight user control. So as we have been describing throughout this presentation, we really want that user centricity. And the perspective we had taken was that we wanted to match system with reality, meaning that the passkeys and security keys were effectively the same thing. And we were kind of coming at it from a passwordless angle, because when we were rolling it out, we had expected that the biggest change for users would be the passwordless aspect. And while this is sort of like a huge change, it isn't necessarily what people take away from passkeys. And so we had things kind of separated out. We had passkeys that Google had created automatically for you in certain contexts, like if you sign in on an Android device. We have passkeys that you created yourself, maybe during sign-in, and then two-step verification only security keys. And so those ones are distinct because those ones still require a password. And so those were our three categories. And it was really ended up being like a super duper tech first perspective. It was a really great lesson we learned for the fact that we were sort of inside the box trying to design outward, and it wasn't always working in the way that we had expected. So what we wanted to do was sort of take the feedback we'd been getting from Googlers, from users, from customers, from all kinds of people, and really rethink about how we were presenting passkeys, and then work with the FIDO UX working group to sort of come up with a broad understanding of what we might be able to do moving forward. And so what we chose to do was to rethink our information architecture. And so we started out we wanted to go think really big and then narrow it down. So what are the big things that people can take away from passkeys, and then how would they recognize them on a security settings page? And so we really started from devices, right? So while we had started out our thinking by being like, oh, this is like passwordless is the big thing here. So that's kind of how we'll think about this. It was actually the devices that users were seeing and thinking about the most, which obviously makes sense. That's what's in front of them. That's what's in their hand, like, of course. And so we kind of broke it down into passkeys on your devices, whether they're automatically generated, and passkeys on security keys, which is just your hardware, right? And so from there, we leverage metadata to sort of convey what to expect. And we did find from the FIDO UX working group testing that 75% of users found this a little better. They found it simple and intuitive, really great. So that is what we chose to move forward with. And you can see an example here. We keep our try it out button, we keep the broader layout, but effectively what we do is, as I mentioned, we leverage metadata to describe the unique aspects of a passkey and how it's used, but we really break it down simply by devices. So the majority of consumer users will just see their devices in there, and then folks maybe more like us, who might be more inclined to have hardware security keys, will see that reflected in here as well. So it'll be broken down by your devices and your hardware security keys, and then the metadata will share with you when it was created, when it was last used, and then also the ecosystem that it's in. And of course, we have a cute little renaming feature in there too, just in case you want to make your passkeys personal for some reason.
I think this speaks really well to the question that the person in the back raised around when you want to make a choice for your users, whether it be for regulation or simply for your own opinion on the security of the systems they're using that tie into yours, is really taking a hard look at how are they thinking about this new technology. While you understand you're making what you believe is a really good choice for them, how are they going to comprehend it? While we know that security keys, the FIDO2 keys, are passkeys now, and that makes sense to us, that doesn't necessarily make sense for our users. And so while we thought that that was going to be the path forward, what we really found was that they needed to know, what do I want, what do I need to have on hand to sign into my account? And then we made our information architecture match that. And I think that's critical when you're looking at making choices to move your user forward in the evolution of particularly a complex industry like authentication.
We got some questions? Ooh.
So I have a question. So let's say like there is a organization who's using 2SV on security keys, right? Now we are calling everything as passkeys. So how do you convince them that like, hey, you guys are already doing it, user experience would be same, just like a bit better if you switch entirely to passkeys? How do you answer the question, I already have a system which requires a user to enter password and plug in a security key. How is just plugging in a security key and tapping it more secure than whatever I have? It's like, we know that, but how do you communicate that?
I think that's a really good question, and it's a question, of course, we are trying to solve. Harsh. But I think that like a really great approach here is to sort of, we've definitely seen this on the enterprise side, where enterprise like really want that like feature, and it's simply because like they want pages to be gated and so on. And I think that's fair. I think if you are an admin and you want that configuration, I actually don't see a problem with that. But if it's a user and they're like, I gotta have my password before I do my second step, then I think it is time for a little extra education and sort of sharing like why maybe you're sort of burning your own time a little bit there. I think really change management is the answer to the question. How do we identify the cohorts that want to do these things, understand the reasons why, and then either empower them to do that if it is right for them, or if it maybe isn't, it sort of helps them change to a more secure or more fast option.
I think Mitch is absolutely right that it's a question that does come up, but with whom, and then how do you reach them is a really good question. Is that a help article? Is that a learn more link? You don't necessarily want to make the flow arduous for the majority of your users who are going to accept the thing that you're proposing, but you do want to make the information accessible. Now, we in this room know that the difference is that it's an end-to-end encrypted string that no one sees, and it stays locally on the security key, and then another half of it, or its pair, its friend, is elsewhere. And so it's really getting into something technical there. So where do you put that conversation is a great question. I think you can say that it is a more advanced security key. I think maybe you could play with experimenting and saying that word encrypted that I said surprisingly users like, even though they don't understand. Say, well, this new way, or these new security keys are actually encrypted, so they're extra secure. Learn more, and then you can go read an article written by an engineer, perhaps, named Harsh.
I have a question too. Something like this, we have this on our platform, and it's basically the devices that you have bound to your online account, and they can go in and rename it and delete. Something we've been toying with, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are, is to delete the passkeys or devices in our situation if they haven't been used in X amount of time. So we can't really rely on our clients. Again, we're financial services, we're regulated, we want to be as secure as possible. If they haven't used it in X number of months, would we delete it? Is that something you would consider on passkeys?
That is something that we are considering across our whole suite of factors, this concept of freshness and proactive engagement with our users and settings. So if that's a nut that you manage to crack, call me, because I'm working on it too. It's how do we get our users in a proactive versus a reactive state. So maybe that is maybe you have your engineers, maybe named Harsh, write in some metrics that help you track how often or how infrequent something is being used, and you have the question of, is this stale? Then you create a campaign to reach out to that user and say, hey, you haven't used these for your security. Can you verify that you still have it? Or do you want to go ahead and remove it? But I do think that the balance is really important there. If you can integrate those messages with campaigns that already exist, channels that they're used to, and making it nice and specific to them and in context, I think is also very helpful. But yes, I would consider that for passkeys, just like I would consider it for recovery email, recovery phone, all sorts of other factors. It's, staleness, freshness, proactivity.
I have a quick question. So on the devices, with regards to naming, I think like right now we have operating systems, browsers, platforms, but is this resonating well with consumers? Because I think of my devices like iPhone 11, or I don't really think Windows Hello, Edge. So is that resonating well, or how is that going?
So if we could do that, that would be pretty great. So the reason why, because I agree, because earlier in the presentation, we talked about how devices are what's resonating, which is what drove this redesign. But simply, when passkeys are syncing, it's no longer sort of just your iPhone. It's the passkey that's across your iCloud ecosystem of devices. And so that's about as close as we've gotten right now. And so we would love to do more with that. And if we figure it out, we'll be sure to share it. And if you figure it out, please share with us.
In terms of naming security keys, I know that we've heard from some of our friends at the big security key manufacturers that they like having that name so that when particularly like an enterprise user is calling IT, they can say, hey, I'm not seeing Rob's rad red thumb drive, as opposed to perhaps a long serial number or some other unique identifier that was defined by someone else. So it's really, I think it's more helpful in those customer service moments that they are allowed to name things in their settings. But that is specific to security keys. I'm not quite sure yet about passkeys, and I want to play with that, as Mitch mentioned.
So I recall seeing this like as passkeys or security keys, like, and you could go manage that. So you've moved away from this language completely?
Yeah, so we actually call this passkeys and security keys now. So are you saying, do you remember like when we had two separate pages? Is that what you mean?
No, I remember yes, that passkeys and security keys. So isn't that confusing? Aren't security keys carry passkeys as well? Or are we getting in the weeds now and yeah?
So, sort of.
The change management.
Yeah. So like I keep bringing in the term change management because ultimately, right, passkeys and security keys, like technology-wise, are kind of the same thing. When it comes to passkeys, like everybody who has a device can create a passkey, but you got to go out and buy a security key. And so while we're trying to figure out, and no promise after this point, zero promises until we get back on track, but like we're trying to figure out exactly what that looks like in the future. Like, can we just move completely to passkey language and have it still make sense for our users who need security keys? Because we still care a lot about them. Security keys are still really important for a lot of users who care about those. But for the billions of users who can use passkeys compared to the millions that could use security keys, what's the right path forward? And how do we get the right level of change for those users? Because we don't want to leave anybody behind.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, we kept it in the header largely, or actually reinfused it, because security keys, as Mitch mentioned in passing, used to have its own page. And so within settings, so the parent page to this one, there was a security keys page, there was a passkeys page. We brought them together because we know the underlying tech is the same in an evolution of itself. And then this is kind of us bridging into that understanding. So users who go to their settings and say, hey, where did my security key go? they can click passkeys and security keys, and that is really just an artifact of our system and the support of security keys that we've had for a really long time, and trying to guide users down this path of understanding the future.
Just from a time management perspective, are you guys happy to carry on taking questions, or do you need to move on to the third section?
Let's jump in, because like once we wrap up this stuff, and this next section's fast. Once we wrap up, then it's open season for all questions nonstop, and you'll be able to track us outside too for more.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. And so when we're thinking about moving authentication forward broadly with holistically with passkeys, we really want to think about how to make interactions smoother, more intuitive, more delightful, and kind of this all comes back to the redesigns that we were sharing with you and some of the areas that we were thinking about improving in the future. Like, how do we make the actual like pre-send, the moment we're sending the pass or asking the user to sign in with a passkey or create a passkey better? What can we do there to increase success and conversion? And what can we do to make passkeys and authentication just better overall? And these are things that we're always experimenting with, and hopefully you'll start to see some improvements over time. And we're sort of demonstrating a lot of our confidence in where we're going with passkeys and like the broader identity technology community is that we have added passkeys to all of our authentication programs. So we kind of just had, you know, username and password, the traditional, the OG, and we had two-step verification and enrollment in APP. And we've put passkeys into all of these and made them a really, really important part of those. And even though with passkeys and two-step verification, like the two is in the name, but you can kind of just skip one of those and just have it be super secure 1SV. And so like we really need to think about things broadly and holistically as we're moving forward with passkeys. And you can also use a passkey with a password as well and kind of have the 2SV if you want. And so it's that kind of flexibility for users as well as we lean into our change management over time and bring users to this new world. Because it's not like we can flip a switch and give everybody a passkey, even though that would be great. It is like an ongoing thing to create the passkeys, get them into great syncing frameworks, and then make sure that users who want to sign in can sign in with those passkeys. And even this year, we made it possible to enroll in the Advanced Protection Program, which is the passkey, phone, and email, which is like a huge achievement. It brings our most secure program to the most users and really makes it more accessible to more people who need it and gets rid of the barrier of a security key for these users, which is really, really important. And we'll be looking about how to optimize our journeys overall. And so how do we bring passkeys to more places more effectively and bring that speed and simplicity and delightfulness to as many authentication moments as we can. So when we're trying to make sure that it's you who is signing in, that we're doing it in the fastest, easiest way possible. You're no longer fumbling for your phone. You're no longer worrying about text messages. You're not waiting for a device prompt. Your device in front of you is authenticating you in the best way possible. And as we always touch on, working with your team holistically and joining the conversation outside of just your product and your space is really, really valuable. You'll learn amazing things all the time, as long as you're keeping your finger on the pulse and listening to everybody engaging with your product, which can be a lot, like no doubt. However, there's great things you can figure out. And as we've touched on earlier, passkeys are a really, really great part of a strong, healthy authentication portfolio. So while I do fully believe passkeys are the future and reducing dependence on password and other factors is the move forward, as I mentioned, it's not like flicking a switch. It's going to be a long dragon's tail of making that happen for all these different kinds of users in all of these ecosystems. And so having that multi-pillar strength for users to fall back on, or if you have people sharing accounts and so on, and they have yet to make a passkey in their own syncing framework, these things can really, really be helpful. And you know, having passkeys, device prompts, SMS, TOTP available, like this can only really benefit your users for now. And so I would always recommend those. It's a great balanced approach to help drive authentication forward without relying on costly, maybe less secure things like SMS. But SMS can still be great for recovery. So it's always great to have a multi-pillar approach. And so the takeaways that we really want to bring home here is sort of try communicating that sign-in is super duper fast, super, super great for your users. Organizing by modality when it comes to your settings has seemed to be very successful for us so far. And so that means, you know, you have device-based passkeys, so passkeys that are syncing through your ecosystems and so on, and then passkeys on security keys. So when you have that kind of modality breakdown, people really get it. They get the passkey on the phone and the laptop, and then the passkey on the dongle. Like that really, really understands, or resonates and helps them understand. And we always say this, but it's an oldie but a goodie. Like prompting users to create passkeys during authentication moments is super duper helpful. Account recovery, sign in, resetting your password, all kinds of these things. These are great moments to get a user into the passkey ecosystem. And since the user is thinking about the account and cares about the account at this time, it can be a really great time to ask them to create a passkey and get that journey started for them. Okay, we got some. This is our second Q&A spot. This is like a little gap, and then we have the open stuff at the end.
So, just for room management purposes, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start at the back. Whilst this question is being asked, if you have a question, please keep waving your hand on and off. Don't, injure yourselves, but just so I can try and keep an eye on who has a question, because I recognize some of you have had questions and I've missed you. Okay, good. So, put your hands down again now, and then as this question progresses, start putting your hands up again, and I'll try and pick people as we go along. That work for you guys up front? Yes,
super good.
fabulous.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for this has been great. Question for something that you said earlier in the conversation about passkey adoption. There was this idea of, you can go ask somebody to help you adopt passkeys into your life, but what about for, communities, populations, demographics as a whole, where the barrier of entry to passkeys, like just nobody in their circle knows how to use them, and take that in a demographic context. Like how do we overcome that barrier of entry to use passkeys? And follow-up question too is like, do you foresee a world where it's not just a simple where it's not just passkeys and a portfolio will always have to be maintained? It's like, could email password be something that we maintain forever for certain demographics or for certain markets?
Two amazing questions. So if I understand your questions correctly, like the first question is certain communities, certain groups, certain cohorts may not be able to use passkeys. They may not know how to use passkeys. They may not be able to teach one another how to use passkeys. And I'll answer that question first. To answer that question, I think it's really about the education and the moment of using the passkey and leveraging the passkey. So if these communities, for example, are able to, in my opinion, right, if they're able to set up a lock on their Windows device, so consumer Windows 11 devices require like Windows Hello to be set up, super great, we love that. If they are able to set that up and use that to unlock their computer to turn it on, in my opinion, that's exactly what they should be doing to use their passkey as well. And that should be like smooth enough for them. I don't always mind if somebody doesn't know that they're using a passkey. If they're able to pass that challenge and keep their account secure, then that's great, that's amazing. So in my opinion, if somebody can unlock their device, then they can sign in and use a passkey, and that's great. And then what was your second question? I'm sorry. Yeah. Right. If we foresee a world where a password goes away, I would love to envision that world. I do definitely envision that world. I think it's about sort of password dependence reduction over time. So how can we introduce things and sort of build that strong foundation? But I do think, for a very, very long time, there's going to be cohorts and groups who are dependent on these other authentication methods that aren't passkeys. But I also think that that does not reduce the importance of up-leveling as many people as we can to passkeys.
And then also asking them to keep them fresh,
Yeah.
as was brought up earlier. All those factors, your account is only as secure as your weakest one. So if you do need to maintain passwords for some cohort in perpetuity, then I think really critically about how do you make sure that stays secure. How does your system prompt your user to use their stronger factors so that you can more readily trust, and how might you gently transition them to a more secure state where perhaps maybe the credential does exist, maybe it's stale, maybe you can't get them to proactively engage, so maybe you deprioritize it as a system. That's just one idea, but something you can look at kind of over time. How do you handle that change?
All the way to the other side of the room, and all the way down this enormously long row of chairs.
Getting your steps in.
To the green shirt who's had his hand up for a long time.
Thank you so much. Two questions around one very specific thing. So it was in regards to a screenshot you had of the list of passkeys that are used for google.com. The questions are around like passkey deletion or revoking passkeys. So one, have you seen users actually go through that step where there's, I just want to remove passkeys? It seems like an unusual thing for users to do. I think we do need to provide that, but I'd be curious if you have public data around our users actually going in here and deleting passkeys. And the follow-up question to that is, how do you message around that? Because I know that can be confusing for folks, right? Because you're essentially deleting the public key, not the private key that's stored in the credential manager.
So I can answer the second question first and simply suggest that, like, that we definitely want that to happen with like the passkey spec broadly, 100%. And so hopefully we'll be able to address that problem, because right now having the private key stored while the public key is deleted would be great to fix that, 100%. And so hopefully we can just get that added to the passkey spec. So the credential manager and the website are communicating, and then one knows when the other's deleted, and then they can handle that. When it comes to managing passkeys, and
if we're seeing folks go in and delete them.
We are not. We get the question more than we see people deleting them.
But I will say we saw more people going in and turning off what we called as a little security valve, which was skip password when possible. It's a little setting in your Google account. We did see a few more folks than we expected, though still not very many, going in and flipping that toggle because they just quite weren't there to trust skipping their password. And we like having that control for them. It just means that hopefully they're in 2SV and they'll input their password and then they'll get prompted with a passkey anyway. It's great. Or some other challenge that perhaps we know they tend to pass and we trust. So we don't really see folks deleting them. We do see folks saying, I love my password. I worked really hard. It's like super good, and I use it in 7 places.
Hey guys, thanks. Quick question on some content design. So when you're trying to get someone to opt into something like passkeys, did you come across any legal barriers around saying things like more secure, better security? Because we had that issue at the place where I work, and our legal people were like, you can't say more secure, you can't say better security. You can say sign in faster, you can say things are better, but you can't say more secure. Because in the event of a breach, that would be potentially catastrophic from a class action lawsuit perspective. So I was just wondering if you guys had experienced anything like that.
Not on that particular point. There were a lot of questions that had to be answered primarily by our product leads and engineering leads to explain that to our lawyers, what we mean by higher entropy, in particular when it comes to our factors. So quite technically, they are more secure. And there are a lot of really big words that convince them of that. However, it's the comparable language that tends to help in those moments. So you can say more secure. You're not saying absolutely secure. We don't say unphishable. We say phishing resistant. So a lot of the times, or you move it into passive language is another way that you work with legal to help get that benefit across to the user while staying kind of comfy in a generic-ish statement. So a lot of times they'll say, like, instead of saying, Google will give you this most secure thing that will absolutely protect you no matter what, we say, by adopting this thing for your Google account, you are giving yourself the best chance at a less phishable account, or something like that. So kind of moving it away from great declarative statements and into more passive voice, and then also using that comparable language as opposed to absolute language or hard numbers as well. So that's kind of, it takes a lot of finagling, but no, we didn't see too much pushback when we got our engineers in the room explaining the tech.
Hey, a couple of questions. One is, what's your strategy on using passkeys for 2SV? The reason I ask this question is, passkeys is always seen as a replacement of passwords, and so why have it for 2SV? And if passkeys are indeed replacement for passwords, then what do you guys see as the best second factor? Right, that's one question. And the other question is I want to ask about account recovery. What do you guys see in users who skip passwords on Google? what's working and what's not from an account recovery perspective?
So I can speak to the first one.
I think the first thing I'll say is that they can replace passwords, is what we suspect. I wouldn't go out and say they are the replacement for passwords definitively, particularly some of the conversation that others have brought up here. There are cohorts who are just attached to them. Enterprise companies in particular love to have two steps, one being a password and one being something else. A user feels a great sense of control and ownership of that password. So there's a lot of kind of like psychological reasons and systematic reasons that passwords are still hanging out. So in that thought, that's why we have skip password when possible as a setting, is this idea of like, we trust this session enough, we know you have a passkey on your system, we believe you'll be able to pass it because of the device you're using, and so we'll challenge with the passkey instead of the password in addition. Now, what does that mean about having both a password and a passkey challenge? Let's talk about 2SV.
Well, when it comes to two-step verification or sort of using a passkey as part of a 2SV portfolio, like the bottom line for us is simply that more passkeys in more places is more better. And so if a user wants to use, if a user is willing to use a password and a passkey, that does effectively set them up for better security in the future. And that's really sort of where we're going. It's ultimately like we do see it as continuous change management and password dependence reduction rather than flipping a switch. We know passkeys are better, no more password for you. It's simply a continuous process. Think of it like a moving stone, kind of losing moss as we go. We're losing password dependence as we make changes.
Okay. So thank you so much for the session. And the question is, for the Europe complaints standpoint, passkeys is still considered as one of the possession factor, and so that's what I have been hearing. And using passkeys to replace 2FA, is it something Google is doing?
So two-step verification is an extremely important product to us. It's something that we still grow, and no. So passkeys won't be replacing 2FA. We have simply added it to the 2FA portfolio. So 2FA is like a distinct program, or 2SV is like its own distinct program, and passkeys are now a very important part of that. But it won't necessarily replace 2SV. Sort of like to touch on that and sort of share the thinking, as we've shared sort of in different kind of tidbits, is that we do think that passkeys are part of a healthy authentication portfolio, which means that the elements of 2SV would still be present. And we do think that there are cohorts of users who will take much longer than others to adopt passkeys, and 2SV might still be very important and viable for them. So 2SV and existing factors have a very important place in our authentication portfolio for a very long time.
Yeah, cool.
Also, ideally, if a user, for whatever reason, doesn't pass their passkey, we would love for them to fall back to the security of 2SV in that experience. So perhaps two other challenges that we know that they'll pass, or they've passed historically.
Okay, great. So, and one more question is, so you were saying the spec is it is coming soon, which is nothing but giving the control to the relying party to manage the private keys, which are all like sitting without the public keys. So when we can expect, and when you provide that, Apple is also going to provide, or it is only Google is coming front first?
So this is something that the FIDO Alliance would be working on, and I can't give a specific date because I simply don't know it. I don't know if it has a date. I know that it's a hoped-for, intended feature. And so the FIDO Alliance, and maybe members of the Consumer Deployment Group or others can sort of help us understand maybe when to inspect that. So I would keep an eye out for them at the event.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got one up here. I'm just going to say we've got a number of questions on the app as well. Some of those are from online, some of them are from in the room. I'm trying to filter through them. I may not get to any of them, but we will make sure that those questions get passed across the presenters later on, and if they have the opportunity to answer them, they will. We're not promising, but they'll try.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful session, and I really learned a lot. So just a question continue from the previous questions. What is the relationship between the passkey and other 2FAs? Because we are expecting the passkey can help to improve the security of the system, but everyone knows that the security of the whole system depends on the weakest point. Passkey is stronger, but as long as you have SMS, OTP, there still the fraudsters always focus on those kind of phishable authenticators. So how do we position the passkey in the whole picture?
So positioning passkey in the whole picture in the context of other authentication factors that exist today that are maybe more phishable than passkeys, like SMS, is a really big challenge. But I think that if you take a deterministic outlook, I think it's really tough to sort of see these things living together because one of them is obviously better than the other one's obviously worse. Like, what do you do? But if you take a sort of like a dynamic or a holistic approach, what you can do is, like, if a passkey is available on an account, you can sort of assign a value to that. And if a phone number is being used to sign into an account, you can kind of like assign a value to that. And then you can sort of think about the context. So earlier we talked about the sort of the technologies that we might apply to the authentication moment. And so we might look at location, we might look at time, we might look at what we're expecting of that user. And if they're not using a passkey, why aren't they? Is this the time when they might be upgrading their device? Like, is there a new phone out and they didn't sort of like transfer the data correctly? Is that where they're signing in? There's all these questions that sort of like you can ask yourself at sign-in time to help you determine security. And the thing is as well, if a user doesn't always have to sign in right there at that time. And what I mean by that is, like, if a user really wants to get into their account, they might be willing to wait. And so if they have a passkey, they've been using it really well for a long time, and they suddenly start coming in from the opposite side of the planet using SMS, then it may be time to sort of ask them to take 5 minutes and go find the passkey, or wait and find another way in. And these are sort of like techniques that you can use to sort of holistically consider your factors and sort of assign them different attributes at sign-in based on historical user behavior. I know it's not a simple, clean answer. Like, we know we just want to move the passkeys, like, just move in already. But unfortunately, like, that's sort of the approach that we're taking to try and help with this transition over time. Because again, it's a dragon's tail transition. The syncing story isn't locked tight yet. Not every user is on passkeys yet. So we do still want to support every kinds of user for a very long time. You got it, 100%. Risk signals are a big part of what we think about.
Yeah, thank you for the session. My question is, when you get a passkey, especially with the multiple credential type passkey with a cloud sync, the retrieval of passkey when a phone is replaced, right? Apple, I think if I'm not mistaken, Apple is the only one which mandates that you need to have a two-factor authentication in order to retrieve it. In Google and Microsoft doesn't really take that position about like that you absolutely need a two-factor. If I'm not mistaken, I think that was something like which I read like a few months ago. If in that case, when you have like a high-risk transaction, let's say like a financial or anything for that matter, right? If you had to get a public, a multiple credential passkey, like which is provided from the cloud sync, I believe FIDO specification is an extension where you can detect a new device and then add your own factors if the IDP has got the support for it. But that extension is not a mandate, it's optional. Is there any directional change in FIDO Alliance in order to make that as a part of the specification?
So when it comes to the FIDO specification, I think like the respective working groups will be able to answer that question. Since I'm coming from the UX side, I can only speak to that aspect. I'm terribly sorry. But what I can share is simply that when it comes to the Google account and like Google devices, or where Google is present on devices syncing passkeys for you, we do have gates to access very secure data like passkeys before they can be used on a device. And so we do ask a user to pass certain challenges, even if the account is a simple, OneSV account. And when it comes to Google accounts as well, even if 2SV isn't on, we will take measures to ensure that we are securing your account as best we can with available information. So you don't have to go manually turn 2SV on, but there are things that we do automatically to maybe, with your consent, we maybe can use the phone number that we were using in the past to verify it's you. We can use device prompts, we can use emails and so on. And so even if you haven't explicitly turned on 2SV, we are taking measures to secure the account, and then we take extra measures to secure the passkeys within that account. And it wouldn't be dissimilar, the measures we take aren't dissimilar to what Apple or other businesses might take.
And the way we tend to manage that when a user hasn't explicitly turned on 2SV is to explain simply why we're asking for something extra in that moment. So you've probably seen a screen that says, verify it's you, or Google just wants to make sure it's you really doing this sensitive thing. And of course, you see those particularly in the more regulated actions like a transaction, because of course we want to meet all rules and regulations.
And with that, we are almost exactly at time. So I want to thank you all for your engagement, both in the room and online. I know we didn't get to all the questions because there were lots of questions because the material was awesome. So again, you've got the opportunity to grab hold of Mitch and Court as they walk through, just reach out, hang on to them for dear life. No, please be respectful of the presenters, but I'm sure they'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have. Do you guys have any closing comments you want to make, like 2 seconds?
I have one that we didn't get to because the conversation was honestly very good, is just that when we say make sure you have your whole team involved from the jump, we mean from when you're sitting down and thinking about why this will be good for your users to watching the metrics come in, developing those metrics together. You want quantitative and qualitative metrics that think about that user. It's not just about lockout, it's about how do they feel about it. And you can work with your data analysts, your user researchers, your product managers, and your engineers to figure out what's feasible and what will really give you a beat on how this is improving the experience of your product.
And I just want to say thank you so much for being here, coming here at 9 a.m. Oh my God, on a Monday, first day of the presentation, first day of the event. Are you serious? Thank you all so much.
Let's have a big round of applause for Mitch and Court, please.